The storm had clawed its way across the mountains all day, and by nightfall it was no longer just a storm. It was a living thing, angry, wild, unforgiving. Silas Brant, the woodsman, had no business expecting visitors. Not up here. Not 3 miles past the last trail anyone remembered. Not in the dead of winter. But then came the knock. Just one. So soft it almost got swallowed by the wind. But it wasn't the kind of sound a man like Silas could ignore. He'd spent a lifetime listening to things most folks ran from. Broken trees, breathless horses, the way silence shifts when someone's about to lie. And this sound, this knock, it wasn't from someone strong. It wasn't from someone sure. It was the kind of knock a desperate soul makes when they're not even sure if they deserve to be let in. Silas stood from his chair by the fire, his knees aching, heart colder than the wind outside. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 8 months, not since the pine tree took the dog, not since the letter from his brother came too late, not since he decided people weren't worth the weight they leave behind. He reached the door, opened it, and the cold hit first, then the snow, then the shape. A woman, barely upright, wearing a threadbare shawl, soaked through, eyes wide, lips cracked, cheeks streaked with frozen salt. Behind her, 3 children, small, silent, wrapped in burlap and trembling like leaves in wind. She didn't speak, didn't beg, just stood there, as if she'd already accepted the door might close again. But Silas didn't close it. He didn't ask their names. He just stepped aside. And in that moment, without a word, without knowing a damn thing about them, a man who'd sworn he'd never care again, let warmth back into his house, and later, though he didn't know it yet, back into his life. Clara Whitmore hadn't always been the kind of woman who knocked on doors. Once, not too long ago, she lived in a town with sidewalks and sermons. She wore lace gloves to church and baked bread that neighbors lined up for. Her husband, Elias, had hands like rope and a laugh that made the baby kick before she was even born. They had a house with painted shutters, a swing nailed to the cottonwood, dreams scribbled in the margins of a Bible. Then one day, Elias didn't come home, just a horse with no rider and a sheriff who couldn't meet her eyes. They told her it was an accident, that he'd gotten between a man and a bottle and a bullet. But in her gut, Clara knew better. Elias had debts, quiet ones, and in a town like hers, folks only whispered about the kind of men who came to collect. Within a month, the bakery job dried up. The land was sold, signed over without her say. And by winter's first frost, Clara had become the kind of woman folks stopped making eye contact with. No one tells you how fast the world forgets a widow, especially one with 4 mouths to feed and nothing left to trade but quilts and apologies. She packed what she could: 3 blankets, a cast iron pot, a photo of Elias so faded it looked like smoke, and she walked. Miles each day, hitching rides with weathered ranch hands and passing wagons, sleeping under stars that didn't feel holy anymore, holding her children to her chest like promises she couldn't break. Little Ruthie cried the first night they slept in a barn. Ben asked when they'd go home, and Sammy, the youngest, just held his sister's hand and stared at the sky, waiting for God to blink. When the snow came early, Clara knew they wouldn't survive another week on the trail. She'd heard whispers from a trapper back in Red Hollow, a man in the northern woods, quiet as death, who lived alone and didn't ask questions. Some said he was a ghost, others, a madman. But Clara was out of options, so she followed the trail, up past the last fence post, beyond where maps stopped naming trees. 3 days with no fire, 2 with no food, and just when her legs gave out, just when the snow tried to swallow them whole, there was a cabin, smoke curling from the chimney like a whisper. Not yet. Don't quit yet. She knocked, not because she believed anyone would answer, but because her children were too young to give up the way she wanted to. The first 3 days passed like a half-remembered prayer, the kind you don't say out loud, just feel in your chest. Clara and the children slept on quilts near the fire. Silas never asked why they'd come, never pried. He just set out food, stoked the stove, and spoke only when necessary. But the silence between them wasn't cold. It was something else. Like a truce between two souls who had both lost too much to ask anyone else to explain. Clara took to cleaning, quietly. She washed the tin plates, swept out corners of the cabin even Silas had forgotten. She didn't need thanks, only purpose. At night, when the wind howled through the trees like ghosts with unfinished business, she would hum lullabies. Not to the children, but to the walls, to herself. Silas watched from the chair, always the chair, a man carved into stillness. But something in him stirred the night he saw little Ben, barefoot and brave, slide a carved bird across the floor to Ruthie. It was one of Silas's. He used to make them before sleep got hard and mornings got cruel. And now, this boy had found it in a box no one was meant to open. Silas turned away, but the past didn't. It came 2 mornings later. Snow was falling soft as ash when a shadow crossed the window. Clara flinched. Silas didn't move. The door swung open. A man stood there, wrapped in a coat slick with ice and sin. "Didn't expect to find you out here, Brant," he drawled. Silas stood slowly. "Get off my land, Corman." The name hit Clara like a chill down her spine. Corman, she'd heard that name before. In towns she passed through, whispered like a curse. "Still playing house with ghosts?" Corman smirked. His eyes landed on Clara and the kids. "Well now, you finally replaced him." Silas's fists clenched, but he didn't lunge. Clara stepped forward. "We won't trouble you. We'll be gone by—" "Lady," Corman cut in, "this ain't about you." His voice dropped low. "You don't know who you're sleeping under the same roof with." The room froze. Corman tossed something on the table. A folded paper, yellowed, worn, an old wanted poster. The drawing was rough, but the name was clear. Silas Ray Brant. Clara looked at Silas. He didn't deny it, didn't blink. Just said, "That was a long time ago." Corman stepped back. "I came to collect what I'm owed. That land don't belong to you anymore, Silas. Not since your brother died." Silas didn't speak. Corman grinned. "I'll be back in 3 days. Either you're gone, or I take it by fire." He left like he entered, without a care in the world. The silence he left behind was deeper than snowfall. Clara finally whispered, You were wanted?" Silas stared into the fire, then spoke, voice flat. "I was 20. My brother owed the wrong men. I covered for him, took the blame, ran to the trees before they could hang me." He looked at her, eyes more tired than guilty. "I didn't kill nobody, but I didn't stop it either." He stood. "You should take your children and go." But Clara didn't move. She just looked at the carving in Ben's hands, the bird that never learned to fly. And she said, soft as falling snow, "You already paid more than most ever do." That night, the fire burned low, but sleep never came. Clara sat with her knees drawn to her chest, watching Silas move about the cabin like a man haunted by too many ghosts and too few words. The children were huddled in one bed now, Ruthie curled into her mother's old shawl, Ben snoring softly, and Sammy holding the little carved bird like it was alive. Clara broke the silence. "You said this cabin wasn't yours, that you didn't build it." Silas didn't turn, just stirred the ashes in the stove. "I didn't," he said. "My father did, a long time ago, before this place was even part of any state." He finally faced her, his voice low, measured. "This land, it's not on maps, never was. It's where men came when they didn't want to be found. Some were hiding from the law, others from themselves." He stepped to a drawer, pulled out a folded scrap of paper, then hesitated, like handing it over meant handing over a piece of himself. She unfolded it, a child's sketch. 2 trees, a cabin, and 3 initials carved into a crooked heart, S+E+J. "My brothers," Silas said, "Ephraim and Jacob, we were born in a different kind of wilderness. One without trees, one where a man's word meant less than the weight of a bullet." He looked away. "Ephraim died of fever. Jacob, he didn't die so clean. He followed the wrong men, made the wrong deals. The bounty was mine to collect, or so I thought. Instead, I got a bullet and a reason to disappear." He leaned against the wall. "This cabin? It was the last place I saw my mother smile. before she lit out to find medicine and never came back. Clara's voice barely rose above a whisper. And you stayed. I stayed because there was nothing left to go back to, and because sometimes silence is easier than being misunderstood. He paused. But I didn't stay just to hide. He motioned for her to follow. They stepped into the night. Snowflakes danced like ash under a pale moon. Silas led her around the back of the cabin, past the shed, down a trail worn soft with time. The trees opened to a clearing. In its center, a wooden marker, weather-beaten, simple, and behind it, a circle of stones. Dozens of them. Some had names, some didn't. Clara read one out loud. Unknown, buried with dignity. Silas spoke behind her, voice caught in wind. When the snows came early, this was the only road passable. Folks tried to cross the ridge, thinking spring would meet them on the other side. Most didn't make it. Some crawled this far. Others I found after. He looked down. I couldn't save them, but I could bury them right. Tears clung to Clara's lashes, freezing before they could fall. You turned this place into a sanctuary. He shook his head. Number I just couldn't stand the thought of someone dying with no one to remember them. She touched one of the nameless stones, and for a moment, neither said anything. Then she whispered, You didn't build this cabin, but you made it mean something. Silas turned to go. Meaning doesn't keep men like Corman away. Clara followed. But it keeps people like me alive. They walked back in silence, but something had shifted, not in the snow, not in the wind, but in the air between them. Something soft, something like trust. The first morning after Corman's visit came with a silence too sharp to ignore. Even the birds stayed away. Clara woke to find Silas already outside, chopping wood with a rhythm that sounded more like punishment than preparation. His movements were deliberate, almost angry, but not at her, not at the children, at something buried deeper. Ben tried to help stack the wood, but was gently waved off. Not today, son, Silas said, then froze as the word son left his lips, uninvited. That night, Clara found a folded paper on the table. A deed, stained at the corners, torn but still legible. At the bottom, the name Ezekiel Brandt, Silas's father. I never transferred the land, Silas said softly behind her. Never filed the title, never claimed it officially. In the eyes of the county, I'm just squatting here. And Corman? Clara asked. He married Jacob's widow. Legally, he's next of kin. He found the gap in the record. She stared at him. So that's it? He just walks in and takes it? Silas shrugged. He's done worse. On the second day, a man rode in, a county deputy with a badge that looked borrowed, and a gaze that never met Clara's eyes. He handed Silas an envelope. Eviction order. Stamped. Signed. Effective sunrise tomorrow. The man muttered, sorry, and turned his horse around, like the ground was too hot to linger. That evening, Clara sat alone outside the cabin, the children asleep inside, their bellies full but their futures uncertain. Silas joined her, but didn't sit. You should take them and go, he said, like a man already building his own gallows. No, Clara replied. He looked at her. She didn't blink. We didn't come this far to be pushed out by men like him. This land has names buried in it. Yours, your brother's. Strangers you chose to remember. She stood, voice steady. And now, ours. The third morning dawned cold and pale, the sky bruised with early frost, the air too still. Corman rode in like he owned the mountain. Behind him, two men with rifles slung lazy on their backs, and the deputy from yesterday, his face pale. Time's up, Brandt, Corman called out. Silas stepped out of the cabin. No gun, no badge, just his frame in the doorway, like a line drawn in the dirt. Corman sneered. Gonna make this hard, huh? Silas held out the deed. This land was bought, paid for. Every inch Corman spat in the dirt. Wasn't registered. I've got witnesses, Silas said, voice rising. I've got names, men still breathing who remember this land before your name meant anything. Corman's eyes narrowed. And what? You gonna ride into town? Stand in court? You're a wanted man, remember? Silas's jaw clenched. Then Clara stepped forward, holding a small leather pouch. Inside, a badge. Worn, faded, but real. "My late husband," she said. "Deputy Marshal. He kept copies of every case he ever worked on." She looked at the crowd gathering at the edge of the trees. One by one they emerged. Ranchers, settlers, woodcutters. Men and women Silas had helped bury loved ones, or fed during storms, or rescued from blizzards with no witness but the wind. One of them, an old man with cataract eyes, raised a hand. "I signed that deed. I was there." Another added, "He gave my sister a plot to rest when no church would bury her." Corman looked around. The odds had shifted. "You all gonna stand with a ghost?" "No," Clara said, stepping closer to Silas. "We're standing with a man who finally chose to stop hiding." Corman scowled. "This ain't over," then turned his horse, kicked up snow, and disappeared into the trees. Silas exhaled for the first time in days. He looked at Clara. "You didn't have to do that." She took his hand. "Neither did you." The morning after Corman rode away, the woods were quieter, but not empty. Birdsong returned, cautious at first. The snow had softened, but its silence carried something new, the weight of eyes watching, not waiting. Clara stepped out first, bundled in a borrowed coat, firewood in hand. She paused mid-step. There were footprints, dozens of them, leading up the trail, circling the cabin, bending off into the trees, fresh, still steaming. Silas opened the door behind her, squinting into the morning. And then, a knock. Not the sheriff, not Corman, not trouble. Just old Mrs. Delaney from 2 ridges down, her cheeks pink with frost, carrying a basket full of cornbread. "Thought the children could use something warm," she said, not asking for permission, just walking in like she belonged. Behind her came Isaac Tompkins, who once broke his leg falling off his own roof. Silas had carried him 3 miles through sleet to the doctor. He brought a box of nails and an old ledger. "Thought maybe it's time we register that land for you properly," he said, setting the box down like an oath. Then came more. Joe and Miriam Powell with a team of mules to help clear the fallen trees. Harlan the blacksmith with hinges and iron tools. Even the quiet family from Hollow Creek, who rarely spoke to anyone. They brought planks, clean, cut, ready. Silas stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed. He had built things with his hands all his life. Traps, fences, graves. But this was something built for him, and it left him speechless. Clara stood beside him, holding Sammy, who grinned at the hammer in Harlan's hand like it was a toy. Ben and Ruthie ran barefoot through the fresh snow, chasing the chickens Mrs. Delaney had brought, by accident. By midday, the roof was patched, the broken step replaced, the chimney reinforced with stone and sweat. No one talked about Corman. No one had to. The repairs said enough. Late that evening, Silas sat by the fire, his calloused fingers wrapped around a mug of strong tea someone had brewed with honey. Clara sat across from him, holding the old deed in her lap. "We'll register it in your name," she said softly. "But maybe add a few more." He looked up. "Whose?" She smiled. "Ours." He nodded once, the weight in his chest, not gone, but lighter. Not because he'd won anything, not because Corman was gone, but because he finally saw himself reflected in the faces around him. Not as a ghost, but as a man, a neighbor, a guardian, a father maybe. He'd been a lone woodsman for so long, he forgot what it felt like to be part of something. But now, he wasn't alone anymore. That winter dragged its heels longer than most, the kind that creaked every step with ice, where the nights came too early and the mornings refused to begin, where you measure time not by a clock, but by how many logs were left stacked by the door. Inside the cabin, however, it was warm. Not just the kind of warmth that comes from a fire, but the kind that seeps into your bones, that holds your hand without touching it. Clara sat in the rocking chair, the wood groaning softly beneath her, a quilt across her knees, her eyes half closed but not asleep. Just still. The children lay curled on a braided rug by the hearth, their chests rising and falling with the steady breath of safety. Silas sat on the other side of the fire, his fingers working slowly through a piece of hickory. He wasn't carving anything useful, just listening to the crackle, to the quiet, to what it meant. "You ever think this would happen?" Clara asked gently, not looking at him. Silas didn't answer right away. Instead, he added another log to the fire. "I used to think love was something loud," he said finally. "Something that came riding in like thunder. Kicked open doors, burned barns down." He glanced at her. "Turns out, it's quieter than I thought." She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole body. That kind of smile only widows learn, when grief and gratitude sit at the same table. The next day, Ben handed Silas a drawing. It was rough, a little crooked, but clear. A cabin, a tall man, a woman, 3 kids, and a dog that didn't exist but apparently had a name. Patches. At the top, scrawled in blue crayon, "Our family." Silas blinked a little longer than usual before folding the paper and slipping it into the inside pocket of his coat. Not the outside one, where things got wet. The one where he used to keep his brother's obituary. That night, when the wind howled too close and the trees bent like they might snap, Clara came downstairs. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She simply sat beside him on the bench by the fire, close enough that their shoulders touched. He poured her tea. She held his wrist for half a second longer than needed. No one said anything about love, but the fire heard it, the floorboards knew, and the snow outside, for the first time in months, melted just a little. And so it was. A lonely woodsman, a grieving widow, 3 children with secondhand boots and hand-sewn mittens, and a cabin once meant to die in, now full of laughter, and soup, and stories made up on the spot. Silas never went into town to brag. Clara never asked for a ring, and the world never sent them a miracle. But they didn't need one. They had each other, and in a land as wild and cold as this, that was more than enough. If this story stirred something in you, maybe a memory, a name you haven't said in a long while, or just a quiet kind of warmth, then stay a little longer with us here at Still Winds of the West. We don't rush stories. We let them sit by the fire until they're ready. Subscribe if you'd like to hear the next one. We'll be right here, waiting by the door.